we'll take a moment to refresh our motivation. Holding dear all sentient beings, wishing for them to be free and to protect them from suffering and its causes. Being determined to help them to overcome their suffering and its causes. And therefore wanting to be fully enlightened, to accomplish what we aspire to or what we're determined to do based on compassion and the altruistic attitude. And it's with that mind of enlightenment, and its aspiration that we continue to study, contemplate and meditate on the Heart Sutra. Okay. And to remember, the Heart Sutra, the actual Heart Sutra, leaving aside the part that the translator added, starts with the prologue, common and uncommon, and then the dialogue between Shariputra and Avalokiteshvara, though it's not a dialogue really, it's just a question and a long answer. In English it's called a dialogue, but it's more even question and answer. Yeah, it's one question and then, of course, a very extensive answer. Starting with Shariputra addressing Avalokiteshvara, who previously has been described as reflecting on, at least conceptually reflecting on emptiness, and now being asked, how should someone who's interested, who aspires to Buddhahood, that is, who's attained bodhicitta, how should such a person now go about their practice of wisdom? And then Avalokiteshvara gives first a concise answer, summarizes it, saying, well, they should behold the five aggregates as empty of inherent existence, also the five aggregates, implying that that, of course, includes the self. He also implies the path of accumulation, then continues with the four profundities, implying the path of preparation. The four profundities, of course, as we've heard, profundity of the ultimate, the conventional, the profundity of the true truth being one nature, and the profundity of the true truth being nevertheless nominally different, not identical. And then the eight aspects, we went through them without, being empty, without characteristics, unproduced, unceased, not with stains, not without stains, not deficient, and not complete, or not increasing, not decreasing, and not increasing. Based, of course, the eight aspects in the sense of lacking inherent existence. So specific, the characteristics of a phenomenon don't exist inherently. Something is not produced inherently. Something is not, doesn't go out of existence, doesn't cease inherently, and so forth. Now those 8 aspects implying the path of seeing. And what we started today is the path of meditation, which I'll explain in a moment, but which, as we've seen, discusses different types of emptiness, which are only different due to their basis. So what is it that is caught in samsara? What is samsara? What does it mean to be in samsara? What is that being? It's the 5 aggregates. How to experience samsara by way of the 5 aggregates. And then you have the 12 sense sources. That's one way in which we experience. So how do we experience samsara? By way of the 12 sense sources. More extensively, the 18 constituents. And now the question arises, how do we wander in samsara? We've got the 12 links. We went through them. And of course, on a conventional level, that's what's described in terms of the 18 constituents, the 12 links and so forth. But of course, ultimately, none of those exist. They're merely labeled. And to the mind of a person who realizes emptiness directly, which once you've reached the path of seeing, you realize there's no inherent characteristics, there's no inherent production, there's no inherent ceasing and so forth. You realize that. You realize the emptiness of all phenomena, and therefore, having realized emptiness directly, starting on the path of seeing, you continue that direct realization. You enter that meditative equipoise, as it's called, or meditative absorption, again and again. The second time, in fact, you enter it, by definition, you've entered the path of meditation. So meditation as in becoming familiar or familiarizing yourself. What are you familiarizing yourself with? With the direct realization of emptiness, which is why I said the second time. The first time you enter into the direct realization of emptiness is the path of seeing, and the second time marks the path of meditation. And on the path of meditation, which is longer in terms of the different times during which you enter the direct realization of emptiness. So again and again, becoming more familiar with this mind. And explicitly, when that path of meditation is described, the text describes, well, when you realize emptiness directly, there are no 12 sense sources, no 5 aggregates, no 12 sense sources, no 18, and so forth. Having talked about the 12 links, well, we've actually talked about the 12 links in the classical sense, which is the afflicted version of the 12 links. But there's also a purified version of the 12 links. So what do you start with? As part of the afflicted version, what is the first link? Ignorance. What is the first link of the purified version? Pardon? Yeah, but think of the 12 links themselves. Pardon? Say again? No, not going backwards. You go forwards, but what do you do? Where do you start?
With the direct realization of inherently existence.
But think of the 12 links themselves.
Clear understanding.
Pardon?
Clear understanding.
Think of one of the links. Use one of the links. Say again?
Ignorance.
Yes. So what do you do with ignorance? Yes. If you eliminate ignorance, you eliminate the compositional factor. If you eliminate the compositional factor, you eliminate the consciousness on which the karmic seed of that compositional factor, which is karma, has been left. If you eliminate that, then you eliminate name and form, and so forth. So all of those, if you don't have those, there is a way in which the afflicted version is started from the back, like there's a forward sequence and there's a reverse sequence. So there are really 4 versions, which is quite complicated. But 2 versions of the afflicted two versions of the afflicted version and two versions of the purified version. So the two versions of the afflicted version, you start with ignorance. Because there's ignorance, there's composition of factor. Because there's composition of factor, there's consciousness and so forth. And going backwards would be death. Aging and death happens because it's preceded by birth. Birth takes place because there was existence. Existence happens because there's been grasping. Grasping and so forth. You go all the way back. And all this happens, goes back all the way to ignorance. All that happened because of ignorance. Now the purified version, as you said, well, if I eliminate ignorance, I also eliminate composition of factor, I eliminate consciousness, I eliminate name and form, all the way to eliminating aging and death. And likewise, the elimination of aging and death is preceded by the elimination of birth, which is preceded by the elimination of existence, by the elimination of grasping, etc. And so in your meditation, you go through these to understand this sequence. But then, what is the relationship between the 12 links, in the way I just described them, these four versions of the 12 links? What is the relationship to the Four Noble Truths? What is the connection between these 12 links? Yes, James?
Well, the 12 links mainly identify that there is suffering. And we could go through there's a path to suffering.
So can you put it in a different... Yes, I totally agree with you. So really it shows there's suffering, it shows there's an origin, it shows there's a cessation, it shows there's a path. So what are the Four Noble Truths there for? A short version.
It shows how the second truth works.
Pardon?
It shows how the truth of the cause of suffering works.
But not just that, because we have these four versions. We have the two afflicted and the two purified versions. So the two afflicted versions describe the Four Noble Truths from the point of view of the cause and the effect. The two afflicted versions, the two purified versions, no, the two afflicted show the first two of the Four Noble Truths, cause and effect. One version describes it from the point of view of being a cause. The second version describes it from the point of view of the effect. Of the first two truths, which one is the cause and which one is the effect?
Ignorance of the cause.
Pardon?
Ignorance of the cause.
Of the true truth, the truth of suffering and the origin. Of those two truths.
Oh.
Of the Four Noble Truths, the first. Yes, the origin is the cause and suffering is the result. The Four Noble Truths, the forward version describes the origin. In the case of the afflicted forward sequence, that describes the cause. The afflicted reverse version describes the effect. So suffering in the form of aging and death is preceded by this, all the way back to composition of factor and ignorance, which are the causes, which is the origin, karma and afflictions. Does that make sense? And then in the two purified versions, again, the cause and the result. The cause is the path. It's not literally a cause of the cessation, because the cessation is permanent. It doesn't change moment by moment. But if it were a cause, then the path would be the cause of the cessation. Right? It gives rise to the cessation. Similarly, the purified version of the 12 links, the purified forward sequence, that describes the path. No ignorance leads to no, and so forth. And then the purified reverse sequence describes the cessation. Okay, all right. And in that way, the Four Noble Truths, or the 12 links, are an extensive version of the Four Noble Truths. Okay? So the 12 links, in their classic version, their classic form, describe how we wander in samsara, but they also describe how we can free ourselves from samsara. And first, the extensive, anything more extensive is directed at beginners. More extensive, the more explanation you get, the better you understand it. And then you have a shorter version, which here are the Four Noble Truths. Yes?
Geshe, I did not understand. What do you mean by purified version?
Purified version means that now you've purified ignorance. Having purified ignorance, having eliminated ignorance. Yeah. So this is just the Tibetan translation here. It's like saying thoroughly, actually it's thoroughly purified. Thoroughly afflicted and thoroughly purified. That's just the translation. Yeah. Anyway, so therefore, for the 12 links, when we look at what preceded the explanation of no ignorance all the way up to no aging and death, that is, on a conventional level, the description of how we are born. What experience of samsara, first of all, then how it is experienced, and then, of course, how we wander in samsara, how we again and again cycle in samsara, and the purified version, how we can get out of it, described by way of the 12 links. Now, the 12 links are not easy for us. It's a quite unusual way, bringing in name and form and all that. If we just had, there's karma, and then before we die, there's feeling, grasping, it would be so much easier. But of course, the more we add, the better sense we get how there can be a lot of time in between the accumulation of a seed, a karmic seed, and its ripening. And yes, I suppose that at the time when the Buddha gave the teachings on the 12 links, it was highly beneficial for those because of the style of teaching, because of their backgrounds. So nowadays it's quite unusual. And many people struggle a little bit with these 12 links. Anyway, the Four Noble Truths are much more straightforward, right? It's like, as it's described in the text called the Uttara Tantra, in which it basically says that suffering is like the symptoms. It's like the illness in the form of the symptoms. And the origin of suffering is the cause of that particular disease. So first we need to recognize when we have a problem. We believe that our existence is perfect the way it is. No way we feel we need to remove its causes. But of course, understanding the limitations of samsara, not just the suffering of suffering, which is called the suffering of suffering. I mean, that which is obviously suffering, that which we don't have. But also, of course, understanding that even our happy states, that which we call happiness, we went all through it together, right? The 40 degrees in the sun and the 15 degrees or 10 degrees in the shadow. It really describes samsara in a very effective way, how we keep changing from hot to cold, just not to experience one over the other, basically. So, therefore, we recognize that there is a cause of suffering with the second truth. And then, of course, if there's a cause, we know it can be eliminated. Of course, that's not always true for an illness, because there are illnesses, of course, that can't be cured. But in this case, the good news is there is a cure. And it's basically like you go to a doctor describing your symptoms, you recognize those, you recognize that there's an origin or a cause for these symptoms, and the doctor tells you, good news, there's a cessation. If you just do this, this, and that. So describing the path or the treatment, right? The way or the medication, whatever diet, etc. you need to take. So it makes sense to describe those four in that sequence. Although the way they arise is the other way around. First you have the cause of suffering, then you have the symptom, you have suffering. First you have the path, and then you have cessation. But it's in terms of recognizing them. They're described in that way on the basis of how we recognize them. Okay, so all this is not that difficult, but you see how the sutra contains a lot more than just saying lack of inherent existence. It's also understanding that yes, we are born in samsara, but there's nothing to be born. We wander, we wander in samsara, but there's nothing really to wonder. There is no wandering in samsara. There's no being in samsara. How do we perceive samsara? Yes, we perceive samsara. We experience samsara, but there's no actual experience, or no inherent experience. Likewise, this is how we cycle. That's how we reborn again and again, but there's no actual inherent and so forth. And likewise, yes, those are the true those are the causes for suffering and their results, the causes for cessation, or the causes for getting out of samsara and its result. And again, they don't exist inherently. Okay? All right. All that is described as part of the path of meditation. I'll just finish the path of meditation on the explicit, from the explicit perspective. Let me just find it. Okay, so there's no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance. Yes. Similarly, it says there's no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. Okay? There's no exalted wisdom. That's the wisdom we have to develop, this exalted wisdom. It's more than wisdom. It's described as exalted wisdom, or sometimes there's, exalted wisdom or primordial wisdom, pristine wisdom, different words to describe that. It goes beyond what we usually call wisdom. There's a different word for it in Tibetan as well. And there are basically three levels. There's intelligence, right? Intelligence. It's a kind of, it's not wisdom yet, but it helps to, as a precursor, as like a cause for wisdom. And then, after you've had intelligence, your understanding deepens. It's a more instinct, or I don't know how to call it, but it goes deeper than mere intelligence, which is more on an intellectual level. So here, it moves to a more emotional level on the basis of having analyzed phenomena, having analyzed reality. And lastly, you have this primordial wisdom that is even deeper, where you access your primordial mind. I guess you could talk about primordial from the point of view of also the level of mind being much deeper, this kind of innate ability of knowledge anyway, accessing that, and having a deepest understanding of reality. So there are these three: intelligence, wisdom, and exalted wisdom. So here, exalted wisdom, it's not just the mere, the initial understanding of emptiness, for instance. You could call that a wisdom, understanding emptiness. But when you experience it directly on a level where you're very familiar with it, and here they use the words interchangeably. It's not like, oh, this far you have wisdom, this far you have exalted wisdom. Not really, but they talk about exalted wisdom definitely when they talk about the wisdom of a Buddha. But even here in this context, as a bodhisattva, from the point of view of a bodhisattva, having now reached the path of meditation in terms of the implicit meaning, having reached the path of meditation, they reach exalted wisdom, which of course doesn't exist inherently. Explicitly it's saying wisdom, the exalted wisdom doesn't exist inherently. Do they have attainments? Oh yeah, they have attainments. They have eliminated, and as I said, I'll talk more about the path of meditation, what kind of attainments, what kind of achievements you have, or what realizations you attain. I'll talk more about that, but they have attainments. Okay? So they don't exist inherently, and even non-attainments don't exist inherently. So just reminding us, despite that high level you can go to, the highest level of the path of meditation, still, it doesn't exist inherently. So let's not forget, that's just on a conventional level.
Geshema, is the exalted wisdom same as ground?
No, I'll talk about the ground. No. That's, when you talk about grounds and path, that describes the different levels. But as part of these levels, you have certain types of understandings. And the deeper they are, the more likely you're to call them exalted wisdom. So it's a deeper type of wisdom. Yes.
On what point do we consider someone as a bodhisattva on the path?
On what level? What marks the path of accumulation? What marks the first moment?
Bodhicitta, but not. Is that the same? Because
Yes.
we can have bodhicitta, we're not bodhisattvas.
No. If you have bodhicitta, you're a bodhisattva. But it's very important to understand bodhicitta correctly. I told you that I worked with the Emory program for some years, and the director of this program, she once said, "It's not that difficult to be a bodhisattva. I'm a bodhisattva. I have bodhicitta." So I was like, "What?" And I asked her, I said, "Why? Do you have bodhicitta?" "Yeah, I want to be enlightened." I was like, "Oh, okay, now I get it. All right." She's not full of herself or anything. No, she's just, there's just a misunderstanding about what bodhicitta means. It's not just, today I want momos and tomorrow I want to become enlightened. No, it's like, of course, it's this really deep, like, it's hard to put it into words. It's really difficult to put it into words. It's so much easier to talk about wisdom. What you understand, what you don't understand. It's much easier to delineate it, to know exactly what is wisdom, what is not wisdom. Here, in the case of bodhicitta, it gets stronger and stronger and stronger, basically. But of course, I've already talked about like uncontrived. But what is the difference between contrived and uncontrived anyway? I say contrived, which means kind of artificial. Okay, I've added some explanation that is usually given. You have to make an effort. So right now, like to have the thought, I want to be enlightened. Anyway, just wanting to be enlightened, that's not enough, of course, because I'm so concerned for the welfare of sentient beings. It's like I'm desperate. I want everything. Desperate in the sense, right now I can't do anything. My only solution is to become enlightened, because only then can I effectively work for the benefit of others. And as long as I still have obstructions and so forth, I never know what people feel and think, what they need, because of course the path being laid out in a relatively simple way. I mean, it's not that complicated, but each person needs something slightly different. For some people, they need to focus more on this, others on something else. So a Buddha is someone who can perfectly guide a person. Perfectly guide a person. Now, even communicate with us. We may not be aware of it, but sometimes the Buddha pushes us, focus on such and such. You have this thought, I better do such and such. So this is all said to be the guidance of a Buddha. We have a sense, to communicate, we need to sit in front of them and hear what they're saying and take some notes. But we've heard in the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra, Avalokiteshvara was inspired to do such and such. Shariputra was inspired to do such and such. So it's not like we have to be around Buddha Shakyamuni all the time, as in like live 2,600 years ago, because otherwise we'd be doomed. Sorry, long gone, no longer around, no longer appears. But the Buddha is still there. The enlightened mind of the Buddha is not gone, and there are many other Buddhas as well. And those we have a karmic connection to, and those who we're open to, or if we're open in general to these ideas, we're receiving guidance. But to receive that guidance, I cannot provide that guidance. None of us can provide this guidance unless we're Buddhas, because we can't know people's minds and inspire people's mind in such a way that they're drawn towards a certain practice. Of course, even the Buddha is limited. Even the Buddha is limited when it comes to our obstructions. Sometimes a Buddha can attempt to inspire us as much as he wants, but we're just not ready to practice it. So the obstructions need to be clarified. But the point is that the best way to benefit others is to be a Buddha. And you're so driven that your care for other sentient beings is stronger than the care for ourselves right now. Because our care, our sense of, wishing to be happy and so forth, that's not even pure love. There's a lot of attachment involved, which is why we often harm ourselves. We don't purely love ourselves. So to purely love ourselves for who we are and wanting ourselves to be happy and acting out of that wish, acting out of compassion, and then directing that towards all sentient beings. And since they outnumber us, that love is even stronger because it multiplies. Towards me, it's just one person. Towards another sentient being, yeah, one person. But all sentient beings is this incredibly strong love, incredibly strong compassion. Right now, it seems very difficult for us to have. But it's such a love and compassion that your entire life, right? When you want something really badly, you want to get that job. And everything you do is towards that. You eat well to get the job. You have, I don't know, plastic surgery to get that job. You exercise to get that job. Well, imagine that kind of urgency, that sense of urgency and strong aspiration. Now you have that towards sentient beings. Whatever you do for sentient beings. If you visualize that drive behind all your actions, and because there's this strong drive and care, that's all that counts. That's the only thing that makes sense for so many reasons. Because we're dependent on each other, because I'm just one person, and every sentient being is so precious. I've received so much benefit from sentient beings. There's no difference except they outnumber me, so they become more important, and so forth. There are a lot of reasonings that make total sense. Or to us, are so meaningful that at some point we can't help it. We're driven by that. And then Buddhahood is just a means to that end. We wish to become enlightened. So that kind of mind that you're so used to, it may pop up at any time, and it informs all your actions. It affects all your actions. That is bodhicitta. And when you have that, you're a bodhisattva. Makes sense, that kind of bodhicitta. But it takes some explanation. All that strength, that drive, that aspiration, that determination needs to be explained. And that arises, as I said, spontaneously, time and again. Whoa, yes, okay, it's for others, it's for others. Every time you meet someone, oh, may I become enlightened for that person. Totally. And you know how blissful a bodhisattva is? Because you don't worry about yourself. The good thing, if you have love and compassion for all sentient beings, you don't worry. Worry comes from a type of attachment. It comes from a type of attachment, like worry for that person that I attach to. Or I need to do something. I cannot do it. I'm so limited. I get frustration. But again, I need to do better. Right? This is like pure joy. Pure joy. If just the well-being of other sentient beings. And every time someone is happy, it gives you so much happiness. Rejoicing? You don't need to force it. You don't need to force it. You don't need to it just comes. It flows out of your heart. Right? Does that make sense? Of course, there are times when afflictions may arise, but it's really easy to stop them. They still need to be eliminated, but they no longer inform our action. They no longer are responsible for all actions. Our actions are mainly controlled by bodhicitta. Can you imagine how blissed out you are? Right? When we're 100% just happy for another person. That's why I keep saying rejoicing, right? Rejoicing, we force it, we fake it until we make it. But actually, it's silly not to rejoice. I'm just one person. If I only feel joyful about my own success, there's only that much success I can get. But if I'm happy for everyone else's success, I don't have to work for it, but I can be happy about it. Right? Isn't that incredible? I can be so happy for anyone who's happy. I don't even have to do anything. They say it's a practice of the lazy person. Usually only give one reason, but there are two reasons. One reason is if you rejoice in the virtue of another person, you accumulate the virtue, right? Without having to actually go out of your way to accumulate it. But another reason is also you have much more joy. Forget about the virtue. You have so much joy in your life, thinking about the success of this person and the success of that person. And it's like, yeah, I can be happy about my success, but how much can I accomplish in a day? So many millions of people can accomplish so much more joy in our life, on top of the virtue. Does that make sense? It's totally worth it, right? I mean, if you had like a Buddhist advertising channel, that's what you would advertise. Instead of, if you just wash with this washing, you will always be happy and clean. No, you choose rejoicing, right? Drive that car, you always be on top of the world. No, rejoicing, compassion and love, you're on top of the world, right? Okay, so in answer to your question, it needs to really be explained, because like this person who said, I'm a bodhisattva, and she was so honest about it. I was like, well, it doesn't seem haughty or arrogant at all. What's going on? But then, of course, yeah, I understood. So then you're a bodhisattva, and then there's still a lot of work. That's only the beginning. But the good thing is, once you're there, it's joyful. It's a lot of fun. Because what we're worrying about right now, those worries, it's just worrying about ourselves, and that's gone. Right? There's all other sentient beings, and you can't worry about all sentient beings. It just doesn't happen. And you know you're doing all you can, and you're going there, and you recognize even their joy. I mean, they do have joy at times, and you can fully be happy about that, right? Okay. Anyway, so what do you then do on the path of meditation more specifically, other than having bodhicitta and the wisdom realizing emptiness, now familiarizing with that? Well, as I said earlier, you do now need to enter the meditative equipoise again and again, okay? And that then accounts for the grounds, as Ram, he used that term, grounds, or the Sanskrit word bhumi. Actually already attained the first ground on the path of seeing. On the path of seeing, you have attained what is called the first ground. I haven't mentioned it yet because path of seeing is only the first ground, so what about the rest of it? Well, the rest follows, the second, third. And when exactly the second ground starts and the first ground ends, there's some disagreement. But the simplest version would be path of seeing is the first ground. The first moment of the path of meditation is the second ground. Some scholars would delineate or would differentiate between the first and the second ground in that way. And so what is the difference between these grounds? They're said to be 10 grounds. So therefore, from the path of seeing onwards, up to the end of the path of meditation, there are 10 levels, 10 grounds, 10 bhumis, or 10 levels basically. So in other words, you describe the path of seeing and the path of meditation by subdividing it into 10 grounds. Just because, and in particular what you're subdividing is the path of meditation. The path of seeing is already one ground, okay, big deal. But the path of meditation is then further divided into 9, the second up to the 10th ground. So which is the highest bodhisattva possible? A bodhisattva on the 10th ground, very good, there you go. Which Avalokiteshvara was as well. He was said to have been a bodhisattva on the 10th ground. I didn't mention that yet because it wouldn't mean anything to you. I should have said it in the beginning. I was tempted to, but I thought if you have no idea what the 10th ground is, it doesn't mean anything to you. So I left it for now. So the 10th ground is the highest level on the path of meditation. And now there are basically 2 general ways by which you can distinguish between each ground. One way is you take everything that is to be eliminated, all that you need to eliminate to become a Buddha, which are the acquired misperception and the innate misperceptions. And you divide them up. Well, you really divide the innate misperceptions into how many to accord with the levels on the path of meditation. It's mathematics. Pardon?
5 each.
No. Think, how many levels on the path of meditation? How many different types how many different types of innate misperceptions do you therefore have to divide? Yes, the misperceptions, yes. So how many different types? 9, exactly. You divide them up into 9. Which, it's not just a random division. It is said you can divide our innate misperceptions, root misperceptions, which give rise to all the other misperceptions, as well as the other afflictive emotions, if you want. Okay, when I say other misperceptions, that may be confusing. They have the root misperception. It's an affliction. Okay, it's a reflection. It's a delusion or affliction. And from that, other misperceptions arise. So other afflictions that are misperceptions, as well as afflictions such as anger, what else? Attachment and so forth. So we distinguish between afflictions that are views, wrong views, and afflictions that are more afflictive emotions, if you like anger and aversion. They're less characterized by the wrong view they hold, but they're more these emotional states, as you would say in English, like emotional states. So the wrong view that holds onto the self that is impermanent as being permanent is not the root misperception, it's the wrong view. But it's not like anger or attachment, it's just a wrong view. Whereas anger and attachment, they are also a wrong view in that they exaggerate, for instance, aversion, exaggerates the negativity of that person I'm angry with. So it doesn't accord with reality, it doesn't perceive things as they are, it exaggerates. However, it's not characterized by its view as much as by the emotional response. Does that make sense? Like how you feel like this aversion. It's more like a feeling, aversion, right? That exaggerated view precedes the aversion, doesn't it? We have the exaggerating attitude. Let's go back to the time when I talked about how the afflictions arise. Of course, there's the root misperception, there's self-centeredness, there's an unpleasant experience, someone insults me, and my mind now, because of my sense of myself existing inherently, the other person existing inherently, these words existing inherently, even the word itself inherently holds this negative meaning. Based on that, I now wrongly perceive this negativity as 100% bad, like worse than it is. I exaggerate, as Aaron Beck would say, the negativity which makes up 10%, I add 90% to that. I totally exaggerate, which is responsible for me not just seeing this insult as negative, but the whole person becomes that insult. That is still the exaggerating mind, that exaggerating attitude. And that then leads to anger. Anger is preceded by that, but anger also holds on to that exaggeration. But there's this moment where I totally exaggerate and I respond with anger. And anger is more an emotion because I'm kind of moved inside. Like it moves me to I don't know, to maybe hit them or say something horrible, or have these horrible thoughts, what I'm going to do with them if I don't act on my aversion or anger. So it has this force behind it that it makes me do things. Does that make sense? It's got this force. I cannot put it into words. It's like I wish for that person to be harmed. I wish. So it's got also that wishing perspective, that wishing aspect. But that's why it's sometimes called an afflictive emotion versus an afflicted view. Do you see the difference? You see the difference? The afflicted view. So an afflicted view is, for instance, the root misperception. Self-centeredness is an afflictive emotion, where you're like, me, my happiness, my well-being. It's a type of attachment. which again moves you to do things. It also gives rise to other misperceptions, which are afflicted views, and these in turn then give rise to anger and attachment and so forth. So I think we can distinguish, and they do distinguish, between afflictions that are views and afflictions that are non-views. Since they don't have a word for emotions, they just call them non-views, like aversion, attachment, arrogance, and so forth. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. Now, having said all that, it's clear that the root cause is an afflicted view. And in order to eliminate everything that can potentially arise from that, starting with self-centeredness, the exaggerated attitude, and everything else, what we need to get rid of is that misperception. That's really what we directly get rid of. And when we say we also eliminate anger and so forth, we're saying we're directly counteracting. It's a bit like that. I'll give you the example of a poisonous tree. If you have a poisonous tree, you want to get rid of that poisonous tree, you need to cut it at its root. You need to destroy the root. Let's say it's this kind of tree that unless you remove the root, it keeps branching off and the tree starts growing again. So what is really poisonous are the fruits. So suffering is that which we don't want. That's like the fruits of the tree. The fruits of the trees are only removed if we cut the root. So what we really cut is the root. And everything else that arises from it is automatically destroyed in that way. Which is similar to saying when we enter the absorption, the meditative absorption into emptiness, directly realizing emptiness. When we enter that, what is that mind? What is that exalted wisdom that directly experiences emptiness? What is its object? Lack of inherent existence. Lack of inherent existence. That is its main object. And in order to directly eliminate something, that mind that is the antidote, and the mind, the antidote of which it serves, their objects must be the opposite. Their objects must be the exact opposites. So the mind that realizes emptiness, focusing on the same object, focusing on the same basis, on the basis of, I don't know, a table or what have you, on the table. So to remove the mind that holds onto a table, which is the basis, as being inherently existent, to remove that, we need a direct realizing mind, a direct realization, or a direct perception as it's called, a direct perception which on the basis of the same basis, the table, realizes the opposite of inherent existence, which is lack of inherent existence or emptiness. Which, therefore, when we realize emptiness directly, we realize the emptiness of all phenomena. Of all phenomena. The emptiness of all phenomena is realized. And therefore, as that mind arises, it is a direct antidote, depending on how strong it is. It's a direct antidote to a particular type of misperception. It doesn't have to arise in that moment. It's not like this perception is there. In fact, it's not there. The misperception is not there in that moment. But because this mind arises, because this mind realizing emptiness directly of all phenomena arises, a certain misperception, it doesn't matter on the basis of what, on the basis of any type of phenomenon, a misperception holding on to inherent existence is eliminated. Because a mind that is based on all phenomena's lack of inherent existence has just arisen. And that then eliminates this misperception, this particular level. That is in accordance with the strength of that exalted wisdom realizing emptiness directly. And it doesn't take that long, right? It doesn't take that long to eliminate it. But to generate that mind is so difficult. To generate that mind and hold it for a while, but, well, it doesn't, like I said, actually, the moment it's there, it starts the process of eliminating. Does that make sense? And it gets rid of it. And because it gets rid of that particular misperception, any other affliction that misperception would otherwise give rise to is eliminated too. Can no longer arise. Which is another way of saying, together with the seeds, together with the potential of that misperception, because the misperception can, of course, at times be absent, right? This particular level of a root misperception. When we're asleep, it may not be there. So does that mean it's gone? No, the potential for it to rise again is still there. With this particular mind realizing emptiness directly, that serves as a direct antidote to a particular misperception. That mind eliminates not just the misperception and thereby anything else that could potentially arise from it, but also the potential for that misperception to ever arise again. Does that make sense? And since the acquired ones are already gone, the passive seeing took care of that, now you have to deal with the innate misperceptions, and they can be divided in 9 types. So, of course, there are so many different misperceptions, root misperceptions, with regard to the many different phenomena. But as I said, it's not like you have to eliminate the misperception perceiving the self as inherently existent, the misperception that perceives the body as inherently existent, the misperception that perceives, you don't have to individually, each one of them, eliminate them. No. A misperception that has a certain strength, first the coarser innate type of misperception, it's easiest to eliminate, that has a certain coarseness, that perceives the inherent existence of anything, it doesn't matter on which basis, that is eliminated during the first moment of the path of meditation. Because the mind that realizes emptiness directly now for the second time, as you enter the path of meditation, that mind now, merely by arising, merely by manifesting, is now able to eliminate this coarsest level, which is described, or I'll tell you later how it's called. This is able to eliminate that coarsest root misperception with regard to any phenomenon. So, let me to give you the names. The names are really funny. They distinguish, first of all, the innate misperceptions. So visualize the innate misperceptions. First, you divide them into three, and each of these 3 you divide into further 3. So you divide the innate misperception in big, middling, small. Big, middling, small. Big means coarsest, middling means slightly subtler, small means subtlest of those 3. And then you take the big misperception and divide it into big, middling, and big, small. Right? I know the vocabulary is, you could say coarse, middling, and subtle. And you can say coarse, middling, coarse, middling, subtle. That would sound a little bit more professional. But the Tibetan words are literally big, middling, big, small, big. Right? Big, middling. First I said the other way around, but big, middling, big, small, big. And then you take middling. Big, middling, small, middling. And then you take small. Big, small, middling, small, small. Okay. Yeah, I know in Tibetan it sounds a little bit more dignified. Sounds more fancy. But the point is, whether you give it some fancy names, this way it's easiest to remember. I mean, as I said, you could also say coarsest coarse, middling coarse, and subtlest coarse. You could apply that, whichever you want to use. But the point is that the big, that misperception that is described as big misperception, that type, or root misperception, that type is eliminated on the first, is eliminated during the first moment of the path of meditation, which is a kind of direct realization of emptiness that has the power to overcome that, oh, I made a mistake. Oh, I'm so stupid. I just I just slide it right back into the Svatantrika view. I forgot the Prasangika view. Because we studied that for 6 years and you're so used to it. No, I slide it right into the Svatantrika view. Still, you can divide them. You can divide them still. It still works into, yes, it still works into those 9. But what you do is the first 9 you eliminate up to the 8th ground, not the 10th. That is the Madhyamika Svatantrika view that I first gave you. So wipe out 10th ground, all these questions I asked you. No. Now you divide the innate afflictions, the innate misperception, and of course the resulting afflictions. You divide them again into 9, that works. But you start on the path of meditation and you eliminate them all the way to the 8th ground. Right? You eliminate them all the way to the 8th ground. On the 8th ground, you get rid of them. But you can, this division into 9, some of them are eliminated together. Some of them are eliminated together, and there are slightly different versions of that. So the point is that you still start on the path of meditation, on the first moment of the path of meditation, and then all the way up to the 8th ground, you eliminate these 9 levels, big, middling, some slight differences here, what you do first and what you do second and so forth. No need to go into all these differences, but you can basically say 8 times you go into a meditative, 7 times you go into a meditative equipoise. Although in some versions there's one ground starts with one meditative equipoise and it finishes with a meditative equipoise. So as I said, I don't want to confuse you too much, but what I'm trying to say is that from the 2nd to the 8th ground, you eliminate these innate afflictions. Okay? You eliminate them. Every time you go into a meditative equipoise, you eliminate, I don't know, big, or middling big, and so forth. You eliminate all those. And then you arise again. You've eliminated this type of coarse misperception, root misperception, or root ignorance. Then after some time you go into it again, and so forth, until eventually when you reach the 8th ground, right? And again, if I'm too precise about it, then this view and that view, it gets too confusing. But just remember, from the 2nd ground onwards, which is also the path of meditation, the first time you again enter the meditative equipoise, up to the 8th ground, you're eliminating these innate afflictions. In other words, the innate root misperceptions and their resulting afflictions. So what happens on the 8th ground, when you've eliminated all of them? What happens? You've eliminated all of them. All the afflictive obscurations, all the afflictions and their seeds have been eliminated. What happens, Luca? You're liberated. Very good. On the 8th ground, you're now an arhat. You're liberated. Because what you have eliminated are the innate afflictions or innate afflictive obscurations, which is another word for saying the innate obscurations to attaining liberation. So what is that? It's really the root misperception and the potential for it to arise. And as long as we have the root misperception, it gives rise to attachment, anger, all the other afflictions. So you eliminate the different levels of the root misperceptions, having started with the acquired one on the path of seeing, now on the path of meditation, the innate one. And when you reach the 8th level, you're described as an arhat. Then you have 3 levels, well, you have actually just 2 levels left, but the last level, the 10th level, has a path, has a direct meditative equipoise, or a meditative equipoise at the beginning of the 10th ground, and a last one. So there's 3. Now the question is, are there only these few meditative equipoises that you enter into when you're on the path of meditation? And many people say, no, there are others as well, but there are only some during which your mind is strong enough to eliminate any of the misperceptions. Yes? And as simple as it's put forth here, and of course as I talk about it, it's not simple upon hearing it, but once you grasp this, these 9 levels from the path of meditation onwards, so from the 2nd level onwards, it seems pretty easy, you know, big, medium, but I think it's more complicated than that, and it's just a simplified version of it. Anyway, the point is that on the 8th ground, you have eliminated all the obscurations to liberation. So what are you left with? What still needs to be eliminated? Because we're at it. What is the aim? What is the aim of such a bodhisattva? Buddhahood. Now, is there still something left that needs to be eliminated in order to attain the state of a Buddha? Yes. The cognitive obscurations, or the obscurations to enlightenment. And what are these? They are imprints. They are imprints. That is really weird. Tendencies of the mind. Imprints. Not seeds. Seeds here actually means the potential. For instance, we say, once you have become an arhat, you've eliminated the root misperception and the potential for that root misperception to ever arise again. Right? So you've overcome that with the potential to overcome again, to arise again. So it's like saying, not only have you made sure that it doesn't arise now, you've eliminated it so that it doesn't arise now, but you've also abandoned the possibility of ever arising again. Okay? Right? So that's good news. It can never arise again. But you're still left with something which are called the imprints. Tendencies. Oftentimes these imprints now are described as tendencies. I think it's a good word in a way. Latencies, tendencies. It's a good word in the sense that, I'll explain to you in a moment. Well, no, I'll explain it to you now, it's better. Lama Tsongkhapa, he talks about these tendencies in the following way. Let's say you have an arhat who's eliminated, whether a bodhisattva arhat or someone who never aimed for highest enlightenment but aimed for self-liberation. That result of having eliminated the root misperception, the different levels, their imprints, their potential to arise again, and the other afflictions. So from that point of view, they're the same. An arhat on the 8th ground of a bodhisattva path, and a hira, a solitary realizer arhat. Same cessation. On that level, no longer anger, no longer ignorance, root misperception, or root ignorance, and no longer attachment. But they may still have the tendency to jump around like a monkey. That's how Lama Tsongkhapa puts it. That's just one example. You know, when we're really attached, we're like jumping from here to there. It's a tendency. It's like a habit left over, right? It's like when you gave up smoking and you sit like that all the time, right? Okay, I mean, it's not very comfortable if you had like a pen, you know? Doesn't really look like I'm holding a cigarette. But it's like a tendency. We've given up the habit of smoking. Can I borrow your pen? I look so not elegant, thank you. But you have this thing and you just, right? It's just a tendency left over. You've given up smoking, but the tendency, so similarly, out of attachment, we may have a tendency, thanks, that's it. Made my point. So out of attachment, we may have, previously we had a tendency to jump around when there's attachment, right? Out of attachment, I jump here and there, I talk a lot. That is out of attachment. So in the case of a person who has that tendency, then they have eliminated the attachment, but that behavioral tendency is left over, okay? That's due to the imprints. Not a big deal. Who cares? They're jumping around like a monkey. It's not a big deal. What is the tendency of their anger and aversion? Well, they made a really grumpy face when they were angry. looking really grumpy and serious. In this case, that may have been their reaction. So their aversionist anger is gone, but every now and then they make this really grumpy face. Again, no big deal. What do I care? There's an arhat with a grumpy face that jumps around every now and then. But what I'm concerned with is the tendencies, the imprints left from the root misperception. Because what they leave behind is the appearance of inherent existence. That remains. So it has a residue. Although the root misperception is gone in that I will never actively believe, actively hold on to inherent existence, but phenomena still appear to my mind to exist inherently. That is the leftover, that is the residue, the imprint left by the root misperception. Does that make sense? So you can eliminate the mind itself, but certain tendencies, they remain because they're harder to overcome. They're harder to eliminate. Okay? And what do? The jumping around and the grumpy face, no, not a problem, because they just manifest in a certain behavior. That can be irritating, of course, at times, but no. Here, what I'm mainly concerned is with what is left due to the misperceptions. In this case, the root misperception. That prevents my mind from realizing the true truth simultaneously. And for that matter, realizing all phenomena simultaneously. It still restricts my mind. It obstructs the mind. The mind can still not know all phenomena. It cannot reflect all phenomena. So you could compare it to the crystal. You can use the crystal example again. So let's say your crystal was covered in mud, which is like an unliberated person. You've got this coarse mud. So when you attain liberation, you remove the layers of mud. But let's say that last level on that crystal, before it can reflect all phenomena, because you can look through it and see everything through this crystal, there's a last layer of some kind of oil, right? Some kind of oil. It's hardest to remove. It's the last layer. So you remove the mud, but you're left with that oil. And it still prevents the mind from knowing all phenomena. Does that make sense? Okay, so that is what is left, what you're left with, even if you're an arhat. That's what still needs to be removed. Those are called the cognitive obscurations. The afflictive obscurations are called that. Why? Well, on one level, because they prevent us from becoming liberated, and it's the afflictions that do that. But it's mainly an afflicted that afflicts our mind in the sense of it gives us suffering. Therefore, we call the obscurations to liberation afflicted obscuration or afflictive obscurations, because they're responsible for our suffering, for our problems, for our fears, for every unpleasant experience. Those can be removed, so then there's no afflictive mind, there's no suffering any longer, but the tendencies are still left. So no suffering, no suffering. Suffering is gone, no problem. I'm totally blissful and things are looking good and I'm satisfied and all that. But because for a bodhisattva on the 8th level, since they're so driven by their compassion and love for other sentient beings, it's like, okay, I got just liberated, great, big deal, but I still got work to do. Because that oily smear is still on my mind. I still have these tendencies. And again, I'm not so concerned about the tendencies of having a grumpy face or of jumping around like a monkey, or whichever way these tendencies manifest when it comes to tendencies of attachment. Maybe, what about arrogance? You know, every now and then I walk around as if I was like, whoa, I don't know what. All these are just these tendencies that express themselves in certain behaviors. But most important, and of course they could also obstruct my mind. It's just not specified in what way they obstruct the mind. But the worst is that I still have the appearance of inherent existence, which are the tendencies left, by my root misperception. The root misperception caused, of course, also those appearances, but even more so, it's responsible for different types of misperceptions. But the misperceptions being gone, that's what I'm still left with. And that needs to be eliminated. Because for as long I have this wrong appearance of phenomena, I cannot perceive all phenomena as they actually are. And these are called the cognitive obscurations. They prevent me from cognizing others' minds, others' path, others' predispositions, others' interest, to then, driven by this incredible desire and happiness, desire non-afflicted, pure desire, pure aspiration, to lead them to enlightenment, to liberation, or even to enlightenment. So now I need to be able to teach them according to their needs, their predispositions. That's all I can do. I cannot literally take them there. I cannot remove, as we said, wash away their non-virtues. I cannot remove their sufferings with my hands. I can't do that. There's certain problems I can maybe solve, with certain things I can help, but I'm quite limited because I can only in the end teach them. I cannot transfer my realization of suchness onto them, but I can teach them suchness. I can teach them how to go about this so that they become enlightened in the fastest way. Of course, you need the teacher, but you also need the disciple. And the disciple need to, of course, follow according to these instructions. And that's not easy because of our obscurations. But if we have the perfect teacher, and then we make a great effort, we're okay. We can reach that state. And that is what a bodhisattva wishes for. And now they need to eliminate what's in the way to being able to do that. Still, they can do relatively little. I mean, actually, of course, they can still not take it away or change anyone. But that's the best they can be. And it's amazing. It's amazing. For those whose mind are ready, there's nothing better because someone has gone there already and they can show you how to go there. And if you have reached a certain level, it's relatively easy. It's just the beginning that is so difficult because our obstructions are so thick. Does that make sense? All of what I said? I'm worried. This is so much information and I've really bombarded you with it. But I hope, it's relatively clear. Okay, so you have these 8 grounds during which you now have eliminated the afflictive obscurations, and during the last 2, you eliminate the last 3. That is from the point of view of wisdom. Wisdom, that's the difference between the grounds, because they're divided in such a way that you eliminate something on each ground, right? And even though there's some slightly different explanations, we don't need to go into that. But there's a more straightforward explanation according to these exact 10 grounds, where they're also a description of what I call the 10 perfections. The 10 perfections. The 6 plus 4 more. So it's not bad news. You have to learn 10 new ones. No, it's only the old 6 ones, the good old 6 plus 4 more. Okay? What does that mean? What does that mean? Well, we've heard, for instance, on the path of seeing, a person, a bodhisattva, enters the direct perception of emptiness. So then, at that time, what are they busy with? Eliminating acquired rude misperception. So it's all to do with eliminating what needs to be eliminated. But they rise from that and they need to strengthen their wisdom for the next time when they enter into that meditative equipoise by means of method, by means of other practices, right? So you need to strengthen. Because why does the mind realizing emptiness directly, although it's the same mind, the same object, some minds can eliminate innate root misperceptions, and others can even eliminate obstructions to enlightenment. So only afflictive obscurations versus obscurations to enlightenment. If the mind is the same, in that it eliminates, the mind is the same in both cases, that it realizes emptiness directly. But some minds can eliminate more than others. So there must be something that makes this direct realization of emptiness stronger. What could that be? Merit. Merit. But also bodhicitta strengthens. It becomes stronger and stronger. Your aspiration to become enlightened, it can strengthen. Don't think that once you have uncontrived bodhicitta, bodhicitta remains the same strength. You can still deepen it and stronger, giving you more and more strength, more and more strength, more and more power, more and more, and strengthening also your wisdom. Although it's the same in that it realizes emptiness directly, but what it can eliminate when it manifests has changed. Its power has changed through bodhicitta, through your aspiration. The mind can eliminate more. So it's like you've got a vacuum cleaner, or your hand has now become stronger to use your broom more effectively to go deeper into the, deeper kind of, crevices of the rocks and so forth. Yes?
Is there like a description how the direct realization of emptiness changes during these different steps?
Pardon?
Is there a description how the direct realization of emptiness changes?
No, it's just saying it's only from it's just saying it's got a greater potential.
Okay, but
Now it eliminates this, can't eliminate that yet. Now eliminates that, and can't eliminate this yet.
but the quality of the realization of emptiness
It's the same. The quality is the same. The quality of the direct realization doesn't change. But somehow the strength, we label the strength has changed from the point of view of what it eliminates. So it's not described the energy that goes with it, or no one explains it. It's not explained. No one seems to see a need for that to exactly describe why that is happening. All they're saying, or why in the sense of what is exactly happening to that mind. All that is said in the scriptures, that now it has the potential or the ability to eliminate a subtler type of affliction. And it doesn't even mention, usually it doesn't really discuss that it's because of bodhicitta, but that's implied. It can only be because of bodhicitta, but also it's strengthened by the merit you accumulate, by the positive potential you accumulate, which strengthens any kind of mind in general, any kind of positive mind. So for instance, on the first ground, on the path of seeing, as I said, you start to, you'd also distinguish between the 10 grounds from the point of view of which of the perfection you surpass in now. That is like, you reach this what's called unsurpassing generosity. On the first level, on the first ground, which is also the path of seeing, when the practitioner arises from that meditative equipoise, their generosity is unsurpassed. What does that mean, their generosity is unsurpassed? Well, we've already heard, once you realize emptiness directly, you can give away your body, right? There's no stinginess. Oh, I shouldn't have given away that finger. Oh, I want a 10 after all. No. It's like you realize emptiness directly, and with your bodhicitta and everything, you can give away anything without any difficulty. So a subtle type of stinginess that may previously still be there, because the bodhisattva, even on the path of accumulation and path of preparation, was extremely generous. But there was still this holding back, this kind of stinginess. That level is gone, right? So you don't hold on, and you're very generous. So in comparison to this practice now, you've reached what's called unsurpassed generosity. On the next level, which is the second level, also the first moment of the path of meditation, it's ethical discipline. It's ethical discipline, the second perfection. In that there's not a slightest even wish to accumulate a non-virtue, not the slightest interest, not a subtle tendency, even not in your dreams, it is said. You don't even dream about. Sometimes we're perfectly good throughout the day. We would never harm anyone. But in our dreams, we may have, kick him in the butt kind of dream or whatever, right? So this is just an example, but not even in their dreams, not even in a state where they're not fully attentive, does such a thought arise. This is how it's explained. So unsurpassed meditative ethical discipline. And then the third level, patience. Incredible ability of patience. And so forth. All the way to the sixth level, wisdom. Okay? So again, also about the wisdom. And here it's not exalted wisdom, but wisdom. Unsurpassed in terms of your abilities, going in and out of, so that's on the sixth level, the fifth level. Yeah, so not going in and out of, well, being able to enter a meditative equipoise and coming out of it again, but not in a shortest moment that it takes a living being to perform an action maybe, but still you can do a lot with that wisdom. It's not really specified. It's not that specified. It would be the fifth ground. Yes, with 10 grounds, it would be the fifth. It's not that. Anyway, never mind. I'm just thinking aloud. But the point is your wisdom is now unsurpassed. Those are the first 6, okay, on those different first 6 level. And then you have 4 more, the 10 perfections. In the first of the 4 extra ones, or the 7th, is skillful means. The 8th is aspiration of prayers, or aspiration, like very strong aspiration for the benefit of others, unsurpassed. Then is power, strength or power, that's the 9th. And the 10th is exalted wisdom, that instinctive kind of wisdom. That is exalted wisdom. So it becomes, of these 10 perfections, while you arise from the meditative equipoise, you exalt in them. You exalt in each one of them. It becomes, because one is easier than the other. The first ones are easier than the later ones, which is why you start with the first one, and that corresponds to the 10 grounds. Okay? All right, so those are, I taught a whole course on this a few times, on just the path and ground. So it's really complicated. You can spend 10 days on just that and make it exciting. It sounds pretty boring, these stages, but it's actually really exciting. And yeah, we've had even a course here going through these path and grounds. But anyway, now one thing that is left, one part of this path of meditation that is subdivided in the way I described, that is characterized by slowly progressing through the perfections, but also characterized by first eliminating one by one the coarser levels of the innate afflictive obscurations, then the subtlest level, until you reach the state of an arhat on the 8th ground, and from then continue on to eliminate the obscurations to enlightenment. And there's one last part of that, which is the very last moment, the Vajra-like. The Vajra-like, or actually, it's described as the meditative equipoise at the end of a continuum as a sentient being. The end of the continuum as a non-Buddha. The last time you enter into the meditative equipoise, having previously not realized emptiness directly in the moment before, being a mind of bodhicitta or whatever, and you are left with the subtlest type of the obscurations to knowledge, or the cognitive obscuration to Buddhahood, the subtlest type. You have eliminated the coarser types, but you're still not omniscient, because the subtlest type has to now be eliminated, and you enter a last time. You enter for the last time into a meditative equipoise. Why am I saying you enter the last time into such a meditative equipoise? You never enter into one again, because you remain in that one. You always remain in the direct perception of emptiness. That is the last time you ever enter into a meditative equipoise. You enter into it, you eliminate the cognitive the last level of the cognitive obscurations, and when it's gone, you're Buddha. And you never arise from the direct realization of emptiness again, because you don't need to. You remain in that state, knowing the conventional truth, knowing the ultimate truth together, and now you're fully effective. Does that make sense? Those steps, how they take you there, I know it's complicated, but it kind of makes sense that the acquired obscurations, they take a little longer. The innate ones, the acquired don't take very long. Eliminating them is quick. It's easier. The innate ones, the ones we're born with, root misperceptions, they take a little longer. Then, of course, after we have gotten rid of those, the tendencies are still there. Because we all know certain habits, they're gone, but the tendencies may remain. The same is true in this case, in the case of the afflictions. And then you remove the tendency one last time, you enter into the meditative equipoise, removing the subtlest obscuration that keep us from being omniscient. And then a moment later, you're a Buddha, omniscient, no obscurations left. Does that make sense, this process? This is how it's set forth in the texts. And of course, there can be variations, but in general, this helps us to kind of get a rough sense of what is possible, of what we can all do, and be prepared, basically, however long it would take us to get there. But we know already what to practice, what we need to focus on, because we know what lies ahead. The emptiness is extremely important, but that we have to also deepen our understanding or deepen our mind of bodhicitta and the other minds, other practices that are part of the method side. It becomes obvious through that, learning in that way. Yes, Nitsan?
So it is makes sense, but in some way, as you described just now, it feels to me like it's starting from almost the end. Because what about all the things before the
Path of seeing.
accumulation? Like before accumulation,
Yes.
before that, this
Yeah.
is where the real suffering is going on, right?
This is when it's most difficult to leave behind. Yes.
So we're talking about starting at a starting point that is
Far beyond us.
Yeah.
I totally agree. Right? We start talking about the path, which is a level that seems to be a goal somewhere in the future. Yes, that is true. That is totally true. Previous to generating the mind of enlightenment, there's no clear description of first level, second level, and so forth. Basically, of course, there are clear descriptions of how to generate bodhicitta. And of course, other descriptions. I mean, you have the whole Lamrim, right? You have got the Lamrim. So that's helpful because it takes you all the way up to generating bodhicitta, and then from there, 6 perfections. And yeah, so you've got a lot before that. But again, it's not as clearly laid out. That's true. But in a way, it's like try whatever you can to generate bodhicitta. Okay? And yes, there are explanations, but in the end, it requires less information. So wisdom requires actually much more explanation. And we studied, of course, a lot. For instance, the study of the hidden meaning of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. We don't study it in the way that we traditionally study just because we don't have time. But there are the 8 types of minds and the 70 topics, and they're all different meditative states, or the 8 clear realizations, as they're called, like path consciousnesses, and the 70 topics. And you study all these different minds, that you need to develop, and this is what, of course, it's also from the point of view of the path. It's already when you're advanced, but it gives you also a sense of what you need to focus on now, what to practice. Yeah, it gives you a sense of that. So everything is in preparation to that. This is what it leads to. This is the knowledge you need to have. And you start off, and really bodhicitta, that's when it starts. And it's difficult. It's really difficult. It's not hard to understand, but difficult to practice. Yeah, it's difficult to practice. But it doesn't require the same amount of explanation as the realization of emptiness. And of course, part of the study, of the explicit study of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, is you learn so much about emptiness, to grow more familiar with that. And what we shouldn't forget, and what we get easily caught in just trying to understand it and study and study and study, but not applying it. That's so important. That's why I keep stressing this. How is this relevant to me? What part can I integrate? What part can I bring into my life? Yeah. So not to see somehow distant from yourself. Whatever part I understand, and what we learned about emptiness now, we can apply. We just need to make an effort. I have a problem. How can emptiness help me? How? Usually when there's an issue, when things are going well and so forth, of course, we need to remember emptiness. But it's even more effective when we need the help, when we look for the Dharma, we look in the Dharma for a solution, and then check how emptiness. And you do it first time and you go, oh no, I don't even know. But you just keep doing it. Don't give up. Just keep doing it. Keep doing it. Go back to it again. Go back to it again. If you had a terrible situation throughout the day, terrible not so much because of what people did to you, but because of your own afflictions, your own reaction to it, you sit with it at night. You sit with it. Okay, I did this, I had this. So where can emptiness help me to deal with the situation? The person who triggered the situation, myself, right? Everything can be addressed also from the point of view of the ultimate truth. There are plenty of other techniques we can apply. Patience, rejoicing, love and compassion, all these depending on which affliction was most prevalent in a given situation. But let's not forget, you learn so much about emptiness. So if you don't reflect on it, you'll forget. You'll forget. So don't give up on it. There are plenty of books that discuss emptiness again and again. There are plenty of teachings on emptiness. So much you can do to learn more about emptiness. And every time you do, you may hear the same teaching again. Next time you'll hear more. Recite the Heart Sutra. Gives you the opportunity. You may recite it the way we do it in the morning. Like take some time in between. Reflect a little bit. Form is empty. Emptiness is form. Emptiness is not emptiness is not other than form. Form also is not other than emptiness. Reflect on it. Say the object of my attachment is emptiness. Emptiness is the object of my attachment. Emptiness is not other, and so forth. Right? Yeah. So it's just a matter of not letting go of it. And if you think about this every day for half an hour, it won't take you that long to... But we're so busy with other stuff. We're so busy with other things. That's our problem. But if you keep doing it, you're accumulating the causes. It's like if you plant the seeds in the garden and you water them and do all that, even if you don't want, the flowers are going to grow. Does that make sense? Okay, great. I've gone through the path of meditation. So we've done a big chunk. We're really almost done. So tomorrow and today, a little bit more of the rest of it. And then tomorrow we finish, and then I talk a little bit about Tantra. Not really about Tantra so much, but more about some of the subtle minds and not so much about, but the stuff that you can read about anywhere anyway. Okay. Oh, the joy, about joy. Yes, I'll talk more about joy. Because Dharma practice should be fun. And it's really nice at the end. Everyone is happy and goes home, right? I mean, it's pretty much the sutra at the end. Everyone is rejoicing and happy about this. This is not what the commentaries say, but to me it implies Dharma practice should be that. Find joy in it, right? Find some joy, some satisfaction in it. Otherwise you won't be able to do it. Joy is really important. That's why when you study the Dharma, for instance, you find it difficult, you read it once, sit down, have a cup of tea, relax, and read it again. It's that much easier. If you just take a break in between, you're totally relaxed, and then go back to it, you understand it better. And there's this sense of joy, not this overexcitement joy, but a deep sense of well-being, a deep sense of happiness doing this, right? Like a satisfaction, a sense of joy. It's such a difficult it's so difficult to find an exact word for it. It's not this overexcitement, but a deep sense of satisfaction and a deep sense of, I'm doing the right thing. Right? With that, you'll never give this up. Right? Okay. All right. So I'll talk more about joy towards the end, because they're all happy at the end, so that's the time to talk about it. Okay. Yes?
So, like, there is a bodhisattva who
Okay.
entered the Mahayana path,
Yes.
and then when this bodhisattva die,
Yes.
and he's reborn,
Yes.
like how
How they
he keep walking the path, or how it works for like children, and then have to catch up, or
Yes. At some level, actually, I don't think it's the path of seeing. On some level, the bodhisattvas still utilize the seeds, the karmic seeds, as you remember, I talked about them. And then they utilize the obscurations, the obscurations to enlightenment. They use those with an intention to be reborn. So love, compassion, and the intention to be reborn, plus the obscurations to enlightenment. They utilize those to be reborn. It's really complicated, that one. Then they have a mental body. I mean, but in the sutric system, there's no further explanation of a mental body. They don't say more about it. In the tantric system, you have better explanations. So it gets really, really complicated. The point is that at some point, they still use these karmic imprints, but it's their prayers and their mental strength that help them to direct their rebirth. But actually, I think it's from the path of seeing onwards that they utilize this obscuration to enlightenment. Somehow they use these imprints, but don't ask me how exactly. How do you use this imprint? But somehow they can control this, and then through the wish to be reborn, through aspiration, love, compassion, then they can take on not just one body, but many bodies, and be reborn with these bodies. And we're restricted to being just one person because there's one I, me, and mine. Doesn't it make sense? In a way, I think of it, this idea of manifesting in many different ways, because I'm so just focused on me that I can only have one body. But if I'm focused on other beings, my mind expands in that way. You know, my mind, right now, our mind is very close. Doesn't it have this kind of blinders, kind of sense of like wearing blinders and like just me? And because I'm so focused on me, I don't really notice what's going on around me. Oftentimes I misinterpret everything around it, believing it's related to me, they're talking about me and so forth, right? That's like our situation right now. I'm this one person, totally limited to one body. But wouldn't it make sense when you generate compassion and love, it's others. Your mind literally opens to others. You open to with other beings. There's more possibility, this expansion of your mind, of your motivation, to then, when you continue to exist in samsara, especially when you realize emptiness, after you realize emptiness directly, with that expansive mind, you take on different bodies, all controlled by the same mind. Right? It seems pretty busy. It's like you've got 5 remote controls and you're flying these planes at the same time. I don't know whether you can compare it to that, like playing 5 video games at the same time. Seems impossible right now. But of course, with certain qualities, with your mind expanding through compassion, through concentration as well, wisdom, suddenly you can control 5 people, and you can do so much more for others, 100, 1,000, there's no limit. So you can work for other sentient beings much more effective, and act simultaneously. It's so much merit. It makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? So the way they describe that. But that seems like fairy tale, like some kind of mystical. But logically it makes sense. Right now, I can hardly look after myself and be that one person, and definitely not for others. But then the mind's ability to expand, right? And you can manifest. And our body is a manifestation of our mind. Let's face it, my body is a manifestation of my mind. The limitations of my mind are obvious in my body. So if my mind is less limited, less limitations, more possibilities, then they will express themselves in my physical appearance. Makes sense? Right? It makes sense, doesn't it? And mind and body are of course, closely connected. Closely connected. All right. So, yes, Ram.
Geshe, the ground mentioned here and the exalted wisdom, are they same in the first line? Here, the ground, this ground. Is it the same?
I think so, yes. Probably. I would need to see the original prayer, which is a tantric prayer. Every appearance, samsara, has a single ground, yet two paths and two fruition. No, sorry, it's not the same ground. Because it talks about samsara and nirvana. Even samsara and samsara is not part of the ground. I don't think so. The problem, of course, you have now with the translations, because sometimes the word ground can be, but also it can also be that the word ground in a context that doesn't relate to the path and grounds can also be used in a different way. In fact, it's the word for soil as well, is the word for the earth element, right? The word they use in Tibetan, in some contexts it means the earth element. In some contexts it means the soil you need to plant a flower. In some contexts it means the grounds and path. So it's important to know which context. But it doesn't talk about bodhisattva path, for instance. It talks about just nirvana and samsara. Samsara, you don't speak of grounds. Yeah. So from the context you could know. Okay, so, all right. Okay, Luca?
Another question would be, so we talked about free will yesterday.
Free will? Mm-hmm.
I wonder what is the perspective of the text and what is the Buddha's mode for action? Is it only in response to suffering beings to solve their problems?
Or is there free will?
Yeah, so we act, I was wondering what is the difference between intention, motivation, and because how does it play into free will, and what is the Buddha's kind of mode of action?
Let's not forget, free will doesn't mean that you can just do anything. The Buddha cannot act out of anger. The Buddha does not have the ability to act out of anger. We don't have the ability to act out of a pure realization of emptiness or out of an omniscient mind. So we're limited and the Buddha is limited because phenomena are dependent on other aspects and therefore, but within that dependent situation we are in, the Buddha is in, there are choices, and we have less choices than a Buddha because our choices are directed towards finding happiness, right? Most of the time, and we don't always have these choices. The Buddha also instinctively wants to be happy and so forth and reaches that at all time. Then motivation, the words in Tibetan or even in English in this context connotes a thinking mind, a conceptual mind. A Buddha doesn't have a conceptual mind. So a motivation is like a driving force. First you need to accumulate a motivation and then can you act. The Buddha acts spontaneous, doesn't need to go through the effort of like first a motivation, then you act. The Buddha doesn't need to do that. So in that way we don't even talk about a motivation, it's spontaneous actions driven by love and compassion. But again, it's one of those ideas that we find overwhelming, very difficult, it's unfathomable, if you like. I mean, with our mind, to think you don't need a motivation, you just act, that seems like uncontrolled kind of, no. But this is one of the difficulties when we talk about someone like the Buddha, with our very limited mind. You know, it's a bit like talking about the Buddha feels like you've been blind since birth and we're discussing blue. Right? We've been blind since birth. We've never seen blue, but we're spending days on end discussing what blue may be like, or red for that matter. Our mind doesn't have the capacity right now to, as a blind person since birth, to know what blue is. Likewise, our mind is so limited right now. It has, of course, the potential to expand, but right now it's so limited that we can talk about the Buddha and it's helpful, but we can't expect to fully comprehend what it means to be a Buddha. It's beyond us. To give you another example, it's like 5-year-old kindergarten students describing the qualities of a professor. Again, we're not there yet. We can get there. But as a 5-year-old one, no way I can understand, fully comprehend the knowledge of a professor, right? It shows us that the fact that kindergarten children can become professors shows that this is only a temporary state, in the same way as we can all become Buddhas and one day know. It takes one to know one. It takes one to know one. So this is totally true for a Buddha. Unless you're a Buddha, you don't know what it's like to be a Buddha. Right? Okay, let's take a break. 15 minutes before we do some last meditation for today. Okay, and if you've got questions, you're welcome.